All right, I think we're good to start.
Okay, I guess we'll call this to order then. Michelle, can you do roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Jewell, Mr. Pahovich,
Yes.
Mr. McNulty,
Here.
Mr. Dove,
Here.
Ms. Trabellis,
Here.
Ms. Alt,
Here.
and Mr. Doherty. We do have 5 of the Zoning Commission members here. Mr. Jewell, our chair, is unable to attend. I'm not sure if Mr. Doherty will be attending at any point, but we did invite all members. And we also invited our Board of Zoning Appeals members, and it looks like Mr. Treves is also here in attendance. So thank you all for being here. And I'll just start off. We've been working with Calfee Zoning. Sean Suter and Jocelyn Gibson are here with us. They put together a zoning diagnostics report that they plan on presenting, and that's going to be what we will discuss this evening. We'll open it up for a Q&A at the end, I believe, and we're happy that they put this together, and I think it's going to be a really valuable tool for us moving forward with our zoning code resolution. All right.
All right. You want to kick it off, Sean?
Yep. You ready for me?
Yes.
Michelle? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being with us tonight virtually. I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Sean Suter. I'm the lead principal and founder of a firm called Calfee Zoning. All we do is work on zoning codes and write zoning codes for local governments across the eastern part of the United States. With me today, this evening, is Jocelyn Gibson, who's a senior consultant and city planner with Calfee Zoning. And so the agenda for our presentation tonight, we'll talk a little bit about the project, describe what a diagnostic report is and why we're doing it, talk about the existing zoning map and resolution, development patterns of the township, talk a little bit about your 2018 plan and how that fits into this analysis. We'll go through our analysis and then give you some of our recommendations. And then the most important part of the evening will be opening it up for discussion with you, since you all use this on a regular basis and probably know a lot more about what's working and not working with the current zoning resolution than we could ever know. But we'll give you our independent and professional analysis of your existing code, and then we can go from there. So next slide, please. All right, so when you look at the very front page, cover page of the zoning resolution, what jumps out to me when I see it, as someone who works with zoning codes, are the number of amendments. I would call this a piecemeal updated zoning code, right? So it started in 1955. It was first adopted in 1955. We are now 65 years into this set of laws for a township that is very different than when these laws were adopted back in 1955. And what strikes me as I look down the list of dates on which this code was amended, it really started becoming amended quite often in the 2000s, starting in 2002. I suspect that's because that's when the growth really started happening in the township. And it is apparent just from looking at that one page of your zoning resolution that the reason there were so many updates over the last 65 years, mostly combined or grouped in the last 20 years, is because the 1955 zoning resolution doesn't really reflect the market realities of development in the 21st century. And so what you have here is a zoning code that, just from looking at that one page, I can already tell that it is going to be a bit disjointed, because when you have a document that starts in 1955 and then is kind of piecemeal updated as things change, as things progress, and things slipped in and taken out, etc., that doesn't allow for a very comprehensive, sort of easy to use document. So that's my observation on that very first page. We were hired for the diagnostic report in December of last year. We kicked it off early this year. Obviously, had anticipated being in front of you in person, meeting you all, and presenting our results of our audit. But obviously, things intervened, and here we are tonight. We delivered the draft report February 19th, and I am very pleased to be here tonight. And thank you to Michelle for making this happen virtually. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is a diagnostic report? Hopefully you've had a chance to read the report. If not, no big deal. We'll summarize it tonight. But what I always say, the first step in determining the scope of your rewrite project, what do you need to focus on? First thing to do is to diagnose how it's working and how it's not. You really can't know how healthy or how sick you are until you have gone through and diagnosed what is wrong with it, right? So you analyze, you pull apart the assumptions, and you test it against the baseline. In this case, the baseline is your 2018 comprehensive plan. So everything we do with the zoning code going forward is benchmarked against that vision from the comprehensive plan, the vision that you spent so much time coming together as a community to put forth in the plan. That is the baseline. So if the zoning code doesn't reflect that vision, then we know it is not healthy, right? It is not doing its part to advance that vision. And so that was what we were using to diagnose your existing zoning code. And what we do is we go through each and every line of your zoning code, and we compare it against the land use vision in the comp plan. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so this is your existing zoning and development patterns. Fairly straightforward suburban style development patterns. Here you have a township, relatively square rectangular boundaries. You have some great natural features there in the reservoir. I guess it's not necessarily natural, but it is now. But the parks, the Metro Park, and those are predominant features of the township. What also jumps out at me here is you have approximately 12 zoning districts that are separated by use and density. That's how the zoning was set up. That's traditional Euclidean zoning, and that makes sense for a code that hails from 1955. General development patterns, typical sort of suburban residential, single family development patterns with a commercial corridor strip type development along US 23, and then industrial development along the railroad. Not an overly complicated development pattern, and fairly homogeneous development pattern across 12 zoning districts. Next slide, please. And you can see that in the aerial photo there. Obviously, a lot has changed since 1955 when this was a very rural place. Next slide. So this is the current format table of contents for your current zoning resolution. Again, just taking a look at this, you see there are approximately 18 different articles or chapters, if you will. And what strikes me as I just look at the table of contents is there are a lot of different articles for things that are similar, meaning a lot of these things could be combined into probably about 6 different articles instead of 18. things such as administration and procedures and enforcement. So amendments, Board of Zoning Appeals, enforcement, zoning commission, zoning inspector, all of those could be in one article and condensed. So as I look at this, I see 18 articles could probably end up being consolidated into 6. Everything we do through a lens of crafting clear and consistent, user-friendly, streamlined, modern, and defensible zoning regulations. So that's how our brains work at CalFE Zoning, and so that's what we're always reviewing and analyzing with an eye towards. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is your guiding document. As you know, zoning laws, zoning regulations are the implementation of your comprehensive plan. So everything in your zoning resolution should support and promote the vision and the values the community has come together around this comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. So what did Orange Township say it wants to do? What's its vision and its comp plan? Well, we reviewed all of these various goals and vision for the township, and these become our benchmarks. This is what we base our analysis on. The community says it wants to develop more commercial uses that are compatible with the community character. Okay, does this provision do that, or does it not? Or is it doing nothing whatsoever and it could be doing more, right? So that's the analysis. And so you can see on the bottom of that slide, the matrix that's attached to the report, the top axis there are those benchmarks. So the things that jump out at me as a planner, I'm also a lawyer and someone who works with communities on zoning matters, are the following words. Quote, promote pedestrian-oriented development. It jumps right out at you, right? The word character comes up a lot. Efficient, sustainable, aesthetics or high quality aesthetics, housing diversity, natural resources. Just those words alone give me a really good idea about the values of your community. And all of these words are what I would expect to see in a recently adopted comprehensive plan just about anywhere. What makes it important to know and understand is, what do these words mean for Orange Township? Because housing diversity could mean a lot of different things in a lot of different places. Same with aesthetics or character. Or what does a pedestrian-oriented environment in Orange Township mean? Does that mean trails for walking? Does that mean more of an urban grid pattern of some sort to allow for a walkable community? So the zoning code is really where the rubber meets the road. These are platitudes. These are aspirational goals. These are things that the community envisions, but the zoning code is where it happens, right? So it creates a baseline or a starting point, and the laws must reflect the vision so that that's where we are starting from when someone comes in with an application for development. The baseline or the default is pedestrian-oriented development. The baseline or the default is sustainable or diversity of housing. What we do in the zoning code then is we codify that as our laws, and if you deviate or seek to deviate from those baseline rules that are reflective of the community's vision, you have to prove why that's necessary. This is different than in a place where you have a zoning code that doesn't reflect the vision and you have to force the application or the project into the community's vision. So an outdated, piecemeal updated zoning code that doesn't reflect the current vision, that's the starting place. So when I come in for a project, make an application, that's where we're starting from. We're starting from an outdated place. And then the township has to expend a lot of energy. The community has to expend a lot of energy to negotiate or force or try to cajole the development to the place where it is today. That, I think, is inefficient. And you see that with places that have a lot of planned unit developments on the books. Those planned unit developments are essentially doing the job of the zoning code that isn't working to reflect what the community wants. Next slide, please. This is your land use map, 15 different sub areas. What strikes me about this is in the plan, so the code, go back to your current code, that is focused on use and is focused on density. Okay, that's how your zones are laid out. That's the basis for those zoning classifications. This map in your plan is based on geographic areas of your township and the desired character or the desired use, but it's geographically based, right? So you're dividing up your township into different geographies that make sense because of a certain network of paths, whether it be roadways, railroads, natural features, whatever, or development patterns, essentially, is why this is broken up the way it is. So that tells me that the mindset, your mindset in township is shifting from simple use segregation, use-based zoning, to something more intentional based on the look, the feel, the character, the desired outcomes in a particular geography within the township. Next slide, please. As we look at your existing zoning code or any zoning code, we apply the following principles. I think these are important to keep in mind as we go through and as you go through the exercise of updating your zoning code. Zoning really should respect existing development patterns, and it should at the same time reflect desired development patterns. What does that mean? Well, we're not here to, you're not here to change your zoning codes so that it creates a ton of nonconformities, so that it zones and makes everything that's on the ground illegal because you change your vision. That's not what we're talking about. We need to make sure that we are respecting that there are existing development patterns, and those patterns are going to remain in place. But there's also a lot of opportunity for new infill or development or new development or redevelopment. And in those instances, that's where the zoning code should reflect what you want to happen there, what the type of development that you're looking for in those places. So there's a balance here. We're not throwing out the old and adopting a whole new thing. So the frustration of everyone who's invested and lived in the township for decades, that's not what we're talking about. But where there are opportunities for change, that's where we want to be intentional and have the code reflect desired development patterns. The second principle is zoning should regulate only what needs to be regulated and focus on desired outcomes. This comes from having read a lot of different zoning codes and having administered a zoning code in a prior role in the public sector, where you're asking yourself, why is this in the code? This is something that comes up a lot. You get an application in for a development or an addition or something on property, and you run into a provision in the zoning code that frustrates development or requires a variance, and you ask yourself, why is this in the code? What is this trying to do? In 2020, Orange Township, what is the purpose of this regulation? And so the zoning, as you update your zoning resolution, it's going to be really important to go through each of these provisions that are in there currently and say, why are we doing what we're doing? Do we need to still do this? And if so, is there a way to do it differently, more efficiently, or better? And as you do that, it's going to be really important to make sure that the answer to that question is only yes if it's focused on achieving those desired outcomes in your plan. Then the third principle, zoning should be the implementation of a plan, not a barrier to achieving the vision. We talked about that. That was my last point on the last slide, is that you know, the zoning should be helpful. You should be able to take a look at your zoning code, read through one district, and have a very clear idea of what the vision is for that district or zone. That is done by calibrating your zoning regulations and standards very specifically to your plan and your vision in your plan. And so what you don't want is a disjointed code, a code that is disjointed from your vision so that you can't get to that vision, you can't achieve what you want to do, and you keep beating your head against the zoning code, and which just causes a lot of friction and administrative time and frustration. So those are the three principles. We look at zoning through those principles. Next slide. And I talked about this a little bit. The methodology, Jocelyn's gonna take over after this slide and go through the analysis and the scoring with you, but I just wanted to touch base on the methodology before she jumps in. What we're doing is, like I said, we are on the top axis. Each includes each of the land use and goals and vision for the township that are in the plan. So you'll see that on the top axis. On the left axis, we're putting in there each of the provisions of the zoning code, each of the sections of the zoning code. And then in the matrix, you can see that we score it. A plus sign means it actively is promoting that development goal, and it's working. It doesn't mean it doesn't need to be looked at. Maybe the language could be a little bit better. Maybe it could be tightened up. Maybe there's a better way to show that concept through a graphic or a table or chart. But it does mean that, hey, you know, you have a provision in the zoning code that is working towards your ends. The exclamation point obviously means it is not supporting those development goals. And you need to take a look at it and say, okay, is there something we should change here that would allow us to support our goals better? And then the equal sign, there's a lot of stuff in the zoning code that is doing neither. It's just playing some sort of supportive function, or it's legally required. It's important to take a look at those as well and to say, okay, is this something that could be playing an active function? And is there something we could do to make that better to get it to the plus sign? We do that for the whole code, and it's not scientific. This is based on our experience and judgment, professional judgment. So I'm not saying this is these are the correct answers. This is just our analysis as zoning code professionals. And then, as you can see on the right, there are notes where we put in comments and other recommendations. So with that, I've talked enough. Jocelyn, please take it from here on the analysis. Thank you.
Okay. I'll start off with some general observations. So as we're reviewing your code and we're getting into the granularity of it, we have themes that emerge, usually about the flow and the substance of the resolution in your case. And so we generally try to log everything that we're seeing, and then we can present that at the end. It's usually very informative. So we had a lot of notes related to organization. We found there were a lot of ways that you could minimize text. As Sean said, sort of condense information. There's a lot of information that's scattered throughout several sections that you could put into one section, and someone could just go to that section to get that information. For example, in your district section, there's conditional uses, and you list those the conditions for those uses for approval, and they are generally the same in every district, but it keeps getting repeated. So that's, they're quite text heavy. So those are the types of things that you could consolidate in one section, given that they're the same, and refer to that section for all the different districts when there's a conditional use for, say, a home occupation. So those are from an organization standpoint, there are a lot of changes that you can make that would really clear up the amount of text that you have. And then also the goal is that when the user gets into the code, the user is going to probably have a pretty specific piece of information that they're looking for. They might be in the, an industrial district, and they want to see what the development, what they can build, or what the use is. And so they're gonna be going straight to something. So the easier that they can go to that section and find the information that they're looking for, the better. So if you look through our report, there are a lot of recommendations for reorganization, a lot of duplicated information. And another thing that we thought is that there are very few graphics in your document, and they can really help the user understand sometimes regulations that have kind of a visual component. You have to understand how things are placed on a lot. It can really help kind of understanding someone who's maybe not used to looking at a zoning code, and it also kind of breaks up the text. So it's kind of just a good tool to have in your document. As I said before, there's a lot of information in your resolution that could be distilled into tables, and things that could even be distilled into a numeric table. So your development standards are in big paragraphs. So that would be a very easy way to get rid of a lot of text. And the same thing with the uses. They're not listed in a table, they're listed through sometimes several paragraphs. And then also the definition section. When your users get into the code, they jump right into the definition section, which is probably not immediately the section that they're looking for. So you can move that to the back of the document as a glossary. Instead of that being one of the first things that they see, they're just sort of stuck in flipping through that. We also found there were several missing definitions. So we list that in the report, the revisions for your definition section. And so now I'll get into our more granular observations from our report. So this is where we compared the goals of the comprehensive plan against the lines of your code. Consider amending the zoning code and map to enhance the community's image and promote pedestrian-oriented development. So as I'm sure you're aware, this is a strong theme through the plan: pedestrian-oriented development and pedestrian connectivity. And we know a lot about the sort of urban design and built environment sort of components that make a positive pedestrian environment. You want something to interact with close to the street. You want smaller block sizes, less distance between intersections, so that a pedestrian is able to get where they're going more quickly without taking long swaths between being able to go in a different direction. There's lowering parking minimums or putting parking in the rear so that pedestrians aren't walking past large swaths of pavement. So there are a lot of things of pedestrian-oriented signage. So if you do have a pedestrian environment, making sure that signage is oriented towards them instead of maybe as high up in the air, they'd have to crane their neck. So there are a lot of these subtleties with urban design that you can include in your code, which weren't really present. Your setbacks are between 30 and 80 feet, which is quite large. So there are things like that that you can do. Lower your parking minimums. We've seen worse than your parking minimums. Your densities were definitely, even some of your districts that were supposed to be higher density, they still had kind of restrictive units per acre. So especially in, and that's going to apply more to a mixed use kind of environment, but just kind of keeping those things in mind. And then there are other sort of amenities for pedestrians that you can include: street trees, wide sidewalks, smaller block sizes, as I mentioned, making sure that there's transparency, anti-monotony, so you're creating vibrancy in the pedestrian environment through both through architectural standards usually, and then a greater mix of uses. So those are the types of things, and we get into more detail on those in the document. So we'll move on to the next one: develop more commercial uses that are compatible with Orange Township's community characters. So we are aware that you're creating the US 23 overlay district, which is really positive. From everything we've heard about it, it sounds like a really positive step in the right direction. US 23 is a really vibrant corridor. It's got a lot of positive features as well. It's got good, it's a kind of high quality sort of suburban commercial environment where it's got very nice landscaping. There's green space. There's The architecture is good. So, you know, just being more intentional with that area. But we also thought, and you know, isolating places where they're undeveloped, underdeveloped, or where there is going to be infill development, those would be intuitive places to see how you can sort of affect the built environment and change your zoning to kind of, as this goal says, just reflect community character and things like your, in sort of your building envelope, building footprint, and sort of architectural standards. And also outlots, shared parking. Those are other things that can kind of make better use of that commercial space and create more vibrancy. And so one idea that did come up was a lot of cities that we work that have a bike path, if they can marry a bike path with a commercial district, a lot of times that creates a lot of vibrancy. There's, you know, like a cyclist-oriented commercial district, and we contemplated extending the multi-use path in High Banks Park, and you've got enough room there that you could have a sort of cycle path or something that would create another avenue for sort of patronage of those businesses along US 23. Improve the zoning and development process by making it more efficient and increasing training opportunities. So in the first slide that I presented, I spoke about our kind of general observations, which this section, you know, a lot of the observations are the same there. Is just making the development process more efficient, just making sure that when someone comes to you with a project that they're able to easily access the information in your code that they need. And sometimes that's a little bit challenging. There's a little jumping around. There's, you know, heavy text. So again, going back to the first slide, the zoning code can help with that by just making the information accessible. So we combined these two goals and assessed them because they had a lot of overlap. Review and revise development standards to encourage a sustainable physical environment that meets Orange Township's community character and aesthetic standards, and expand general development standards to ensure high quality aesthetics within sites and the built environment. So one thing that you do in your resolution is there's cluster development opportunities, which is very positive. When you've got a site, you can really maximize the sort of inherent natural aesthetic qualities of the site with the cluster development, and you can cluster development over here and sort of preserve those things, and that's great. There's still a little bit restrictive on the density. I think it's still quite a low unit per acre within that cluster development, so there is opportunity to kind of expand that. This might come in another slide, but you know, density bonuses. So you know, you can have a little more density there, which some of the community may or may not support. But you know, with if with density bonuses, you can just create all of these public amenities. You could create, you know, as developers, if they come in and want to do a cluster development, there can be all, you know, green space, maintaining riparian zones, public art. There are different things you can do that could be a positive for your code. So moving on to the next slide, adapt the township growth trends by encouraging housing diversity. And this goes back to the development standards that don't really allow for a lot of housing diversity. As you can see, that, you know, in the amount of units within a building, I think the maximum is 4 in any district, and then 4 units per acre, and then the height maximum of 35 feet in the multifamily districts. That just kind of limits the ability to create a lot of diversity. So it's something to consider when you're revisiting those standards. And again, I'm talking about density bonuses to kind of as you are getting more housing variety, you know, you can get a lot of public amenities. You know, as I'm sure moving forward, multi-unit structures are going to need more green spaces. This is going to be something that people seek out. So. Consider zoning amendments that affect natural resources and conservation, such as urban design standard, conservation development, no net loss of wetlands, and use of green infrastructure. So with the density bonuses and the cluster development that I mentioned, green infrastructure is something you can incentivize, which has a lot of positive effects on the community. So it's something that you can write into your revised resolution. Also, you do have excellent, beautiful amenities in your green spaces and parks, and there isn't a de facto zoning district to help help manage those and manage development that can or cannot occur. It probably won't, but having a dedicated parks district would probably be helpful in just ensuring that they stay preserved. So just to give, this is my last slide before I hand it back to Sean. Just an assessment of your current zoning resolution, just from our observations as we went through it. It appears clear that people have been steered towards planned districts in the past, and moving forward, you're going to have to contemplate how you approach that. You know, as I said, assessing where there's infill redevelopment opportunities and assessing what you plan to do with those from a zoning standpoint. There's a lot of room for reorganization and streamlining, you know, really helping your user navigate the code. As far as some of your goals, you can see that, and you can see in the scoring, it does sort of seem like your regulations could be doing more to promote pedestrian-oriented development and housing diversity and walkability, which were strong themes throughout the plan. And there's other sort of specific things we've listed in there, like parking requirements, sparse development patterns, strategically relaxing your standards. Obviously, you want that to be a focused effort. So the generally applicable section is a little bit different because a lot of those generally applicable regulations are brought forward into the districts, especially with the PDs. The PD review kind of takes care of, and what a normal code would be, a lot of the generally applicable regulations is kind of reviewed as part of the PD process. But there are some things that you could, if you were going to assign more de facto districts going forward, you're going to create some in a revised zoning resolution. There are some things that you could add in there, like just more robust, you know, your landscaping. So there's kind of one paragraph for the landscaping and buffering. And, you know, some cities have very, very long landscaping sections because they want to, you know, with how much of our built environment is touched by human hands and how little of it is naturalized anymore, the landscaping standards can actually have a really large effect on like the biodiversity of your city, sort of this drainage, like natural drainage and things like that. So some places are really expanding their landscaping and buffering sections, and streetscaping, a lot of positive, especially from the pedestrian standpoint. Signage, I didn't get to your signage section, but it is a little bit difficult to navigate. There are some additional permissions that are needed in your signage section that could go away and just make it easier to administer, I'm sure, from staff. Parking reductions could be added where appropriate when you're creating walkable districts. There's all sort of general regulations that could be added just to get some certainty around some of those things that people might be adding to the property. So we're moving into some of the final recommendations, and I'll give it back to Sean.
Great, thank you, Jocelyn. I think what you can see from that analysis is that very few of the existing regulations actually promote the things that the township says that it wants. And so that's, I think, a very illuminating analysis, just looking at those pluses and exclamation points. So thank you for that, Jocelyn. I think that hopefully will help guide the conversation as you move forward. So here's some recommendations. I think it's obvious the document is not organized in a user-friendly manner. So we know that things can be consolidated and it can be reorganized to make it more user-friendly, more streamlined. So that is a definite easy, I think it's an easy recommendation to lay out a much simpler code. People take in information in different ways. Some people are very visual, other people like to read, lots of words. So what we try to do is present the complex information of zoning in as simple a way as possible. That means utilizing tables, a lot of graphics, in addition to words. And that can really help with the usability of the code. It also, because we're dealing with development, the built environment, it's very visual, so graphics also are very important. to demonstrate concepts relative to the built environment. We talked a lot about, or you talked a lot about aesthetics in your plan. I think developing some base design guidelines. You don't have to go overboard. Most communities in Ohio don't have an appetite to get very specific with design standards, but I think some general design guidelines would allow you to control the aesthetics a little bit more. I know you have a lot of PDs and PUDs, and a lot of times those are they're pretty strict with homeowners associations. But I think if there's a baseline to start from the township, that would be helpful, along with some baseline landscaping requirements. Again, you don't have to go overboard. A lot of these developments are going to, they're nice developments, they're quality developments. They're going to want to look aesthetically pleasing, so you don't have to go overboard, but a baseline, I think, is a better baseline is important. Districts that are not applied anywhere in the township or left over or that were put in place and never used, I think certainly we can remove those and clean that up and streamline. In employing development regulations that encourage infill development and redevelopment, I think this is going to be really key as you move forward with some zoning amendments. Infill and opportunities for redevelopment, like I said, are really where the opportunities for change are going to be in the township. The opportunities to let that vision shine, that's where the opportunities are going to be. What's built is already built for the most part, and there's not a whole lot that can be done there, and some of it's quite nice, so there's nothing that needs to be done. But those areas where there's an opportunity for change will be in the infill and any new open land that you have for development. I think next slide, perhaps, or is that the last slide?
This is
there we go.
The last presentation slide, yes.
Okay. Again, calibration. Standards calibrated toward your vision are going to effectuate your vision. And that's what we're going for, right? Because the zoning code is the implementation of the plan. So if you want more walkable places, there are a lot of things, as Jocelyn talked about, that you can do. There also are things you can do to lessen the burden on the property owner or the developer by reducing off-street parking requirements if they're overburdensome, for example, or if there's availability for public parking or on-street parking in some instances. But there are things that can be done to calibrate the code to the vision, to better calibrate it to the vision, so that you have fewer needs for variances, fewer opportunities for conflict. Jocelyn talked about the open space district. Uses. Every code we look at, it's important to take a fresh look at your use categories to make sure that they reflect the modern uses that are desired in the marketplace. Now, a few months ago, I would have told you breweries, distilleries, maker spaces. I don't know going forward if those are still going to be the hot uses that you should account for in your commercial zones due to the last couple months. But it's important, though, I think that the moral of that story is to, from time to time, take a fresh look at your uses and make sure they're up to date. I can't tell you how many codes we look at that have very outdated uses from the 1950s or even before that even. One of the codes we're working on has a milliner, a hat maker. I mean, there's just not that many hat makers anymore that we need to take a look at those, and especially in our ever-changing world we're in now, to make sure that the uses that the market desires and that reflect our vision are in the code and either permitted or somewhat conditionally permitted. The signs, a big one. The more modern approach to sign regulations is to create a sign menu essentially, here are the 6 sign types that are allowed in the township, and here are the materials and the lighting and the size and all of that, so that you do have some uniformity or more uniformity of signage if that's what's desired. And then taking your land use plan, your future land use plan, and focusing on those geographies and creating districts around those, because those are unique parts of your community, and focusing on regulating to the character, the desired uses, the desired development patterns within those geographies, I think is going to be a much better way, more effective way to regulate your vision than the existing Euclidean zones that you have, which are based on use and density. So those are our recommendations generally. More specific to the different provisions in your existing code, you can find those in the matrix attached to the report. And that's all we have, and we look forward to discussion and questions.
Oh, great, thank you. I'm going to unmute everybody to see if anyone has any questions or comments. If you don't have any, I kindly ask you to put yourself back on mute so we can hear some of that background noise. But so I will do that now. Let's see if that'll work. All participants. I think I did it. Or if anyone has any that wants to submit on the chat room, I can.
I'll tell you what, that was an excellent presentation. I think Orange Township needed to do this 15 years ago. I love the simplicity of everything that you've laid out and the organization. I think this is a huge plus. We haven't got a lot of land left to develop, but that still works for the future as things change. So no, great job, guys.
Thank you. I know we threw a lot of information at you. There's a lot of detail, but hopefully it can help frame the conversation as you move forward and looking at your zoning code.
Yeah, I agree with Dennis. Our code, as we've used it over the past years, we've realized there's holes in it, there's problems with it. There's been problems with the signage, there's been problems with, mixed use, there's been problems with cluster development. So it's nice to have an outside person come in and say, hey, these are some issues that you need to work on. It sort of reinforces what we do and gives us a way to move forward. And hopefully make the changes because we're not the same community we were, like you said, 20 years ago or even 15 years ago when I moved here. And we need to change with the times. So I appreciate that overview, it helps. I did have one question. It's more of a definition. You keep using the term green infrastructure. I have an idea what you mean because I have a LEED certification, but I'm not sure a lot of people are with the whole, green infrastructure, the greening. We're still a relatively small, conservative, or I would say not small, but very conservative community. Yeah. So using the term green might take a little definition or explanation.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So if you might want to explain better what you mean by green infrastructure in terms of water runoff, stormwater protecting, the Olentangy.
Right. And they've gotten a lot better at sort of touting the economic gains from green infrastructure and how much it saves you money over time. It's not money like you don't see it, but it does, and they can track it now. So that kind of helps. Conversation points for people that might not be as receptive otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea because and even with the term sustainability, some people think of sustainability as in terms of being green. Other people think sustainability is more like economic sustainability. And if you can tie the two together, at least here, if you can tell them, hey, economically, this is going to benefit the community. You know, it's going to make, you know, maybe your taxes go down. I hate to say that, but that is, you know, we've had other things in the past we've tried to move forward with, and there was a lot of backlash when they're like, oh, that means my taxes or my property taxes are going to go up, or, you know, I don't want to have to support community center that I'll never go to or something like that. If that makes any sense. Michelle, you can chime in if you want.
No, I mean, I agree. And I think these are all good points to think about. And, you know, we're definitely going to have more discussion on a lot of those items. But yeah, it's hard for me to have much comment yet. I mean, I've read this, and I worked with both Jocelyn and Sean thoroughly on this document, and Jeff also was able to participate as well, which was great. And I mean, I think we've all noticed that there's a lot of concerns with the code. I think mainly the inconsistencies and some of the outdated information we have, and so some of the standards are difficult to enforce with our signage, and you know, we don't have any design standards. Our landscaping's kind of ambiguous. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think we need to work on, and that's kind of why, again, like you said, it's nice to have a third-party view on this.
Michelle, I have like 8 bullet points I'd like to just ask.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's good.
So CalFE has offices around the nation. Is this mostly being developed out of Columbus or out of another location, or how's that work?
Yeah, good question. So we are based in Cincinnati, but we are part of the CalFE Halter and Griswold law firm. So we are a subsidiary of the law firm. We have offices in Columbus downtown and in Cleveland. And Jocelyn and I happen to be based in Cincinnati.
Okay.
And then we have offices outside of Ohio as well. I do a lot of work in Indiana, and then in the East and Mid-Atlantic.
There's a lot of text about the community character, vision, and image. Sean, what do you think our community character, vision, and image is?
Well, that's a great question. I see it as a nice suburb, right? It's a place where it's a bedroom community. There's natural features. You have some good natural features, but I think the character could be better defined. Like I said, the development patterns are fairly straightforward. You have suburban single-family residential developments, and then you have what I would call corridor commercial, and then some industrial. So that's something that the community has to kind of figure out.
Okay. Who is updating the zoning resolution? Is that something that CalFE is doing, or?
As of now, no. We only have a contract with them to do this diagnostics review. You know, our next steps is to do an RFP for a zoning resolution, a major zoning resolution update. That was put on hold for a little longer just because of this US 23 overlay district that's under implementation right now.
Okay.
Because once that gets established, that will have to be in our new code. So
in the update, will a trustee and a zoning commission member be part of that?
as far as the
Or
change.
is it, and as far as the rewrite, or is this something
yeah.
that's going to come in front of the zoning commission and we discuss it?
This would be any typical rezoning application. So it'll go through regional planning first for their recommendation, and then it will come to the zoning commission, and then ultimately the board of trustees.
But during the rewrite, who would be involved in the rewrite other than the company that's hired?
It would be staff
Okay,
staff and the consultant working together to prepare the text.
okay,
And then we'll ask for the zoning commission to review and provide comments, and we would make
Okay.
revisions there.
okay. Well, knowing that that they're just doing the overview and not the rewrite, I don't need to ask any of my other questions. Thank you very much for your time. This is very helpful.
So one concern that I have is that we don't seem to have any place where people who work in the township can afford to live in the township. Like Sean was saying, it's a nice bedroom community, and that's great. But the people that are working in all the stores can't afford to live here. And I'm not saying that we want to have, you know, huge apartment blocks, but I agree with the comments that, you know, when you consider a multifamily development to be 4 units per acre, you're really not providing any place for those people to live. Affordable housing is a tremendous problem throughout Franklin County, and Delaware County is probably in the same boat.
Hey, Mark, I'm sorry. Can you state your name and address for the record, since you
Absolutely.
are one of our
Mark,
residents?
yeah, I'm Mark Freeman. I live at 478 Glenside Lane in Powell. So I actually have an unofficial path from my backyard to the northwest corner of the Meyer parking lot. So everybody in Green Meadows, High Banks Meadows, Fox Ridge, you know, this whole area, they all come through my backyard to get to the commercial area up there. And there should be some more official paths. If we want this to be at all a pedestrian friendly area, you've got to be able to get from where you live to where you want to spend your money. And that's currently, you got to be in really good shape to do that if you're gonna walk. That's a long distance.
I agree. We're not very well connected to a lot of the shopping centers and stuff. There might be sidewalks in the developments, but once you get out of the development, the speeds are crazy and you take your life into your hands.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sidewalk that goes across like the front of the Meyer across to the Home Depot and through there, and that's great. But I mean, it's sort of like having a sidewalk on the front of the Las Vegas Strip. I mean, you're not going to walk that from one end to the other, not more than once.
And not only that, but there are areas that need sidewalks that don't have them. I don't know how many times I've seen people walk from like the Walmart in that area to the apartments behind the chiller. And there's no sidewalks there. Yet still people are transversing that route for their groceries or what have you, that we could do a lot more to make it more walkable.
Yeah, and it becomes a safety concern also.
Mm-hmm.
That's my issue.
I've only lived in the area for a year. I came from Hilliard, and there were a lot of issues there with lack of sidewalks for kids having to walk to school. And I imagine we've got similar issues here. I don't know, but I assume so, given the lack of sidewalks I've seen. So it's not only getting people to where they can spend their money, it's getting the kids to the schools.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sidewalks to connect the individual residential developments up to where the schools are.
Yeah, I think you raise a really apropos point here, and that is, and we were talking about a little bit earlier, what is sustainability? I like to think of sustainability as holistically being, you know, economic, but really creating a place that's healthy, economically viable, and that's also healthy for us to thrive in. And so one of the challenges we have right now is what is economically sustainable? Before the pandemic happened, if we were having this conversation in January or February, I think I would have said your biggest challenge is going to be the lack of housing options across generations. I think that's still the case, but single family homes may be more attractive now. You're reading things about how you know, people want a yard because maybe they're going to work from home. But to your point, Mark, I think is your name earlier, is connectivity. So the more that we are in our homes, whether we're working from home or whatever, you know, we're going to want to be able to walk to things, to amenities. We want to be able to be connected with people, even though we are maybe working from home and not working in an office setting. So we just don't know a lot of answers yet to how this is all going to shake out on the other side. But I think there are a lot of considerations to take into account now that some things are changing in the world. So what economic sustainability means tomorrow might be a little bit different than what it means, what it meant yesterday.
Well, we've got a very typical suburban environment here where a car is an absolute requirement to survival. And I mean, I feel very privileged that I can just walk over to the Meijer and get a few eggs if that's what I need in the morning, because I can't make pancakes because I don't have enough eggs. The vast majority of people, that's a car trip. I mean, anything you want to do is a car trip. I mean, if I want to go to the Dairy Queen, I mean, it's all the way up north on 23. You know, there's no local ice cream shop. I mean, there's just so many things that, you know, become a series of car trips. And if we're really talking about having a pedestrian-oriented community, we need to have areas where that isn't true.
Yeah, and I think you raise a great point there in that the communities that are going to be the most sought after, I think personally, in the future, are going to be those that offer that connectivity and that walkability. But it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be an urban environment. It doesn't have to be an apartment block, like you said. Single family developments, we know single family is seeing a resurgence. People are wanting to get out of their apartments to some extent and move into a single family house more and more after this pandemic, and you know, have a yard, and that's great. But they also at the same time are going to want that to be connected to some walkable amenity, whether it be shopping or restaurants or recreation. And so those two things coming together, I don't think it's an either or. I have to live in downtown or the short north to have a walkable, amenity-rich lifestyle, or I live in Orange Township where I have to drive everywhere and commute. It's not an either or, and I don't think that's going to be a binary choice anymore for people. They're going to want both.
Yeah, I mean,
and so
there are
there's
places,
a real opportunity for the township.
Yeah, there are places in Columbus, for example, like lifestyle communities, actually the name of a company, I don't know if they're still in business, but where they would build residential developments, and there were restaurants and shops within the development where people could stay in the neighborhood and still go and have a place to eat or grab a drink or whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And we just don't really have that kind of thing here. I don't know that we have, you know, any blocks of townhouses, for example. It's pretty much prohibited by the zoning from what I've seen.
Yeah, and I think the idea behind Evans Farm, which half is in Orange Township, correct? The idea behind that is something like that. I'm unaware, I don't remember if in their plans, a lot of those communities, they have a town square. They'll build their own town square, which has commercial and mixed use in the middle. And then they will have sort of single family homes, but built in a more of a traditional neighborhood design, traditional neighborhood patterns where it's single family homes, they're a little closer together. So it becomes much easier to walk to your town square. And then they try to, I don't know, I don't remember off the top of my head if Evans Farm does, but they try to build in housing diversity, and that's kind of the idea. And there's kind of, it's kind of new urbanist principles, but they're seeing a resurgence, and you guys have one in your backyard, which is very unique. They don't build a lot of them in this part of the country. That's a model, I think. I'm not sure how you guys feel about that development, but it's a strong model for that.
I'm like, Michelle, I don't know if you want to address it or not, but we did, when we zoned on Evans Farm, it was supposed to be like a town center where we would have commercial and residential and a different variety of residential. The difficulty we had was with our current zoning code, we couldn't have mixed use. We had to zone it in two pieces. One was sort of single family residential, and then everything else, the commercial or the multifamily, was zoned separately as commercial. Really, because our code wouldn't allow for that at the time. I don't know, Michelle, if you want to chime in, or if anybody else who was part of that rezoning wants to chime in, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was just at least one of the many red flags when that was going through. I mean, it took over a year for that to get approved. And that is, I mean, granted, that is the biggest project that we probably will ever see in the township. So it was a very big deal. And, luckily we had our 2009 comprehensive plan address that we needed a town center. And so it was, it was called out in our vision, and we had that going for us. But as far as the process through it, our current zoning code made it quite difficult because, I mean, our commercial district had a request of urgencies to allow housing, and it doesn't really seem right in the long run, but like in order to make some type of mixed use, you have to allow more than one type of use. And so I mean, I think that's a big thing that we need to address. But I mean, hopefully the town center does, at least for Mark's points, I mean, the goal of that is to address that sense of place, that walkability, the mixed uses. I mean, I wish I could tell you when that's going to happen, but it was approved in 2015, and it is slowly moving forward. But I'm sure this pandemic isn't helping anything either. But there are plans in place to at least have something of a community place. So,
I mean, I live in a $300,000 house. I'm in a position of privilege, but I have a lot of friends that work in retail. I have a lot of friends that work in food service. I have a lot of friends that work in call centers. Folks that are making $12 to $18 an hour. There's nowhere for them to afford to live here. Folks working in the Walmart, I don't know where they live, but it's not in my neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with that. But when we have, I hate to say this, when property values are high and when you have low density, I mean, no one's going to construct a home or an apartment that somebody at Walmart would be able to live in. I mean, it's just the reality of it. Delaware County is such a thriving community, and the school district helps. So people are willing to pay that much for homes and live here. But I agree. I mean, I don't know how we have several retail restaurant type of businesses along 23, and they must have a pretty long commute to get there. So it's a concern that we have. Yes.
Mark, this is Adam. I really appreciate all your comments and certainly agree with on the majority of them. I think to Jocelyn and John's credit, they've put together here a really good presentation for us to kind of digest and certainly make some adjustments. As they were going through their presentation, you definitely see, we talk about things like, I guess, using pedestrian oriented development as an example, and the walkability, to certain places like you mentioned. One thing that was really eye-opening for me was, we're talking about this as kind of the image that we want to have, and we have 84 in the red there, and only one really supporting that. So I think you I guess us as a whole, the board, are somewhat on the same page in certain aspects where, you know, this is the beginning of a change that, you know, we really just need to sit down and evaluate and figure out what needs done and how we're going to go about that process. If I can, you know, Jocelyn and Sean, I know it's been said already, but I really appreciate your hard work and everything you guys put into this and this report. This is, it gives us a lot to really, you know, kind of go through and improve the township. So we certainly appreciate you doing that. But, you know, Mark, I think back to what you were saying, you know, we agree. And I think we all just need to, you know, take this information that's been provided and kind of deep dive into it and go through everything and you know, make some changes for the better for the township. So I think Michelle, we're not really doing anything really other than, I mean, we don't need to know anything or do anything right for this.
Yeah, there's no action. Oops, sorry. There's no action that needs to be taken.
Okay.
I think this is more just like we were presenting the report that was created by Calfee, and, you know, maybe in the nearby future we can have some form of a working session to see what do we really want to, you know, change in our code. And
yeah.
But yeah, no actions needed this evening.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this report's great. I mean, I really think this kind of analysis is really helpful, and it certainly points to the need for really coming up with something new from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
You know, instead of trying to figure out how to add yet another set of amendments to this, you know, to really outline a new document that really expresses what it is we want to achieve through the zoning regulations.
I agree.
Yeah, agree.
This document will be uploaded on our website, and I will be posting this this meeting on YouTube. I apologize for the technical issues I had earlier today, but luckily we don't have to take any action, so we're good on that.
Michelle, a question.
Yes, Kelvin.
What is the timeline, or is there a timeline for reacting to this or producing something else? I mean, the report's great. I agree with everybody else, but I kind of want to know what's the next step.
Sure. No, great question. So hopefully, if I haven't kept you in tune, Kelvin, we will be sharing. I'll share an update with the Board of Zoning Appeals, but we are working on US 23 commercial overlay district as we speak. It has now, the draft has first been completed, and it's now at the Regional Planning Commission, which they actually discussed this evening as well. And then it's going to be going to the Zoning Commission on June 14th, I believe, or 16th. And, you know, because of that initiation, that was the initiation started by the Board of Trustees, so that kind of became in the forefront. So we're working on implementing that text, which will create a lot more, how do I say this? A lot more opportunity for the US 23 corridor. So the goal is to get that implemented July, August time. I don't want to speak on, there's a consultant that's involved with that, and the Delaware County, we're partnered with Delaware County Economic Development on that as well, and the Finance Authority. So hopefully that gets wrapped up towards the end of the summer, early fall. And then my goal is by the end of this year to start the process on doing the entire zoning resolution update. That's a pretty big project. So it can take several months to complete. So I'd like to have a new code for 21. So hopefully that answers your question. It doesn't seem like it's 2021 seems forever to some people, but then it's time's going fast these days. So
that answers it. Thank you.
Sure.
Michelle, do you think that there's any opportunity to take any of the feedback that we have in this report and have it actually applied to that 23 overlay? For example, the specifics about landscaping standards or sign menus and that kind of thing, or is it really just too late to influence that at this point?
No, Mark, I think that's a great idea. I'd be happy to share this with the individuals that are working on the 23 district too. So, I mean, this is a public document and we can take advantage of it thanks to Jocelyn and Sean. So.
All right. Is there any other ending questions from anybody?
Yeah.
All right, everyone.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If anyone had any other questions or comments after this meeting, feel free to reach out to me, and I can reach out to Sean and Jocelyn too if I need their assistance in anything. But this is just the beginning. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for holding the meeting.
Everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thank you.
Adam will just confirm that the meeting's adjourned, and then I'll stop the recording.
Okay, that adjourns the meeting then.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Yep.